Okay, I think we can start our program now. Welcome everybody to another Global Evaluations Week webinar. I hope you've had a wonderful week of all the sharing and learning from the different webinars that's been on offer. Here at Twendembele, we decided that we're going to explore the topics of civil societies and governments collaborating response to the COVID pandemic. And to start off, I'll just like to go through a couple of ground rules, or house rules rather. I would like to ask all participants just to keep their videos off and to stay on mute at all times. This webinar is recorded, so we'd really like to keep the quality as good as possible. For this webinar, I will not be the one to moderate or to facilitate the discussion. This will be done by Josephine Watera, who is the head of M&E in the M&E division in the Parliament of Uganda. Josephine, you're welcome to take the floor to introduce our presenters and our topics further. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Perfect, our coordinator for this event. I appreciate all participants for joining us to this panel and discussion this afternoon, this morning, depending on where you are. And of course, the topic that we are presenting is the civil society organizations and government collaborating in response to COVID-19 pandemic. This has been unprecedented. And we know that transparency and accountability are essential for good governance, but even more important in times of crisis like this that we are undergoing. And the collaboration between civil society and government is a big factor in helping us to know what is working elsewhere, bringing this evidence on the table, and for government taking action on this evidence. So with me, I have distinguished speakers this moment for this session, and I'll be reading their bios as they come along with their presentation. And we say ladies first, but of course the ladies are first when we're dealing with developmental projects, not when you have a snake in your home and you say ladies first. So let me present the first lady for this discussion. Blanche Rizat is a mother of 2 boys. And I love it that she loves starting with that part that she's a mother and she's a social worker. So when you combine these two, the people at heart is the main topic here. And her current role, she's a program manager at the Parent Center since 2014. She works very closely in issues of children and child protection, issues of prevention and early intervention services. And her specialization is on programming and ensuring that these programs are actually of impact in society, dealing with aspects of child abuse and the perpetrators of victims of domestic violence, trying to put them under control. And she has a very important quote under her bio. She says, "I always wondered why somebody doesn't do something about that. Then I realized I was that somebody." So I'm glad we're all here today for this discussion, because now we know that we are the people who are to make change happen. And so please, my dear Blanche, take it on from there. Let's have that first presentation from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks so much, Josephine. Thanks so much, Parfait. I'm really honored to be your guest speaker today in this place. I think this has been an opportunity to just share some of the learnings, I think, from myself, from the work of the Parent Center, which is based in the Western Cape, Cape Town, South Africa. And so the perspective I'm going to give you is from 2 organizations. So the Parent Center is also part of a national network called the South African Parenting Program Implementers Network. It's SAPIN. And so you'll see a little bit of history on the presentation. The Parent Center is about 37-year-old organization that was established as a prevention and early intervention services support for parents. So we were birthed from a child protection organization, which did a lot of removals of children out of homes and really started saying, how do we start doing this work and working smart rather than working so hard? And then that's where the basket of service kind of developed. And we have offer counseling, parent-infant home visiting, teen parenting, fatherhood, and then the community empowerment component of the work. And so in doing this work over these years, we've developed I think it's the motto and the way we engage is that it's not going to strengthen communities if we don't collaborate. And so the collaboration of SAPN happened as it was established in 2018 as part of a National Violence Prevention Forum, which was led by the Institute for Security Studies. And so the Institute of Security Studies is really trying to see how we can frame the programs that we do in every area that we are as violence prevention strategies. So the network was developed, and then we actually decided on a few almost guiding principles for engagement, which means we develop a united voice of understanding with core principles, networking across 12 organizations. It's 12 and growing because the network is quite new. And the principles include governance, having sound evidence-based programming, sensitivity to cultural context, and shared learning opportunities. So I'm one of the driver group members, and I'm also joined by Volmi, who is from the Seven Passes Initiative, and then Catherine, who is from the Ububele Education and Psychotherapy Trust. In front of you, you see two products. So this is how the Parent Center helps children. We help children by positive parenting. And then the SAPN network has actually worked with educators nationally on creating calming classrooms. So during the pandemic, we found that many of the teachers were struggling to really come to terms with their own trauma around what COVID was doing, and then having to be containing children who are coming back into classes. So this model was developed and will be rolled out nationally in South Africa as well. The next slide, please. So South Africa's response to COVID-19 is I think we realized that there was a veil on real poverty in South Africa, and showing us all what we normalized. We normalized rampant unemployment and extreme poverty. It was always there, but the immediate onset of the coronavirus had just reminded us all of it. And in this world right now, civil society is being called on more and more that we need to collaborate and connect. So civil society over the past 3 decades in South Africa has become less, there's a sense that's become less influential. So before COVID-19, we were really hardly heard. And I think there was lots of isolated struggles around funding, around how do we engage, how do we make impact instead of being segregated and service delivery. But the work happening on the ground in South Africa has been driven by non-governmental organizations. The collaboration during this time has been evident, but it has not been very coordinated and sustained around poverty alleviations. And those were not very forthcoming. I share some ideas from the ground of examples of stellar work being done of collaborative initiatives, humanitarian support, food schemes, food vouchers, emergency medication being delivered to the doorstep of the patients, telephonic counseling support, free testing facilities, grief counseling and support, and then engagements on violence prevention strategies, the Calming Classrooms initiative, as I mentioned earlier, and then there are varied child protection initiatives that actually took place during this whole period of COVID. So many of the organizations shared that. But our realities of collaboration, we need to almost put into perspective this today. So we look at the work that's been done with government and the work that's been done by civil society. And we want to acknowledge that there's definitely room for the two to work together. Under government, there was always a limited capacity to move quickly. The reallocation of existing funding contracts was really challenging, especially within the ECD sector, that early childhood development. Closer collaboration with civil society was encouraged. Sustainability of projects was really hard to engage with. And then the language of partnership versus beneficiary needs to really be engaged on. I mentioned that because lots of the partners within the network were saying you are considered a partner when a contract is signed. However, somewhere the language is different when the crisis arose. So civil society, I think the benefit was really that there was ability to reach far and reach quickly. There are limited resources, they overstretch capacity, sustainability and functioning of many organizations who have during this time sadly closed their doors because they were unable to sustain the organizations beyond humanitarian funding or brief pockets of funding investments. But collaboration has really been the turnaround point for engaging and championing initiatives during this time. So I just want to close with this quick statement I'm going to read. So the challenge facing civil society is great. Extraordinary leadership will be required in the months going forward by non-governmental organizations and government alike. It is time for people to come together with the communities across the divide and ensure that goodwill and Ubuntu, which is our proverb around I am because you are, that has arisen. It will continue to rise and spread so that we can build a South Africa that truly is there and wanted by all. So good can come out of this crisis, but we must continue doing good and engaging together. So I think that was just purely my message for today. I really want to say thank you for this opportunity. It felt quite brief, but if there are any questions, please be sure to pass them through and I'll engage as best possible. Please find our contact details and you can make contact with us at any time. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Blanche, for that takeoff. It's a nice takeoff, and I've picked the aspect that there is room to work together. We always think that we are competing. We always think that when you go there first, then you'll get a credit. But we forget that besides issues of contribution, contribution is more important. If we all get to know that we pulled our hands together, and you have closed nicely with the aspect of Ubuntu, and you have emphasized the issue of reaching far and reaching quickly, because the effects of COVID have knocked at everybody's household, whether you've tested positive or not. The effect of just being told stay at home, social distance, living away from your community, is something that we Africans, we never saw this coming. So it's a very good start that you've granted us, and I'll move right away to the second speaker. And colleagues and members who have joined us online, take note that we have the chat. So drop in your questions in the chat. After the three speakers, I'll pick up your questions from that point. So let's just let the presentations flow, but take note that I will have you come in at a later point. So our second speaker is Julius Mukunda, who is who currently serves as the Executive Director of the Civil Society Budget Advocacy Group. It's a big CSO in Uganda. We work so closely with him on aspects of budgeting within the committees of parliament. Mr. Mukunda is an economist by profession with 15 years experience in management economics. He's known by UN Women and international agencies as an accomplished gender budget expert. And I love that about him. He wants to see everyone at the center. No one should be left behind. And he also represents civil society organization in the Uganda Public Expenditure and Management Committee. It's called PEMCOM, Immunization Fund, and other highly technical spaces for public finance management and reforms. He has worked in many countries, around 15 of these, including Zimbabwe, Rwanda, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and others. And I'm honored that he's the one who accepted this invitation to be part of this, to give the voice of civil society in this discussion. You're very welcome, Julius.
Thanks, Josephine. Thanks for the opportunity to share our experience on how we engage the government during the COVID period. About CS Bank briefly, we are a coalition of 101 organizations, and we established in 2004 influence government decisions, resource mobilization, utilization for people. And our catchword is have Uganda and that's what we work majorly on. Effect of pandemic on CS work, I think when we look at COVID, next slide, if you look at COVID and the way we have been working, one of the key things is that our work majorly really is these kind of engagements, meeting people, preparing, doing research work, going to the field. And for us is that during this pandemic, one of the key elements that affected us mostly was difficulty in tracking government service delivery. Because one of the models we have is that we organize, mobilize local citizens to go and see how their health centers are functioning, see how their schools are functioning, the water points. But now this was the lockdown period. And as such, there was very, very little monitoring of government service delivery, and this affected our work. COVID lockdown also led to reduction in resources for implementing CSO work. Because as economies around the globe slowed down, we get more than 90% of our money from abroad to do our work. Priorities also shifted. Now it was first did it in their home countries before they can deal with outside countries. And therefore it became challenging for us to specifically undertake our work because many countries resorted to securing resources for their own people. When it comes to government, then we had to look around how we can come to government during the pandemic. And for us, I think what we did was first was promoting efficiency in allocation and use the limited resources. We worked with government of Uganda to review the national budget, for example, to look at the wastages, because one of the things before we realized was that where we were at that particular moment, that the little money we have, we should not spend it efficiently. So we reviewed the budget, looked at monies that were going to travel abroad, welfare, entertainment, those kinds of expenses, to ensure that we reduce them and we allocate resources where it was needed most. But also it was a period where we decided that we shouldn't keep quiet, and we said to make sure that we demand accountability. Because we know in a crisis, people can profit from the crisis. And as such, during the pandemic, we had a campaign to ensure that policymakers return money they had taken for purposes of addressing COVID. We felt that money can be allocated better in other areas. There was this core idea around the IMF slogan of do everything but keep the receipts. And as such, we felt that it would be very important for Minister of Finance to issue guidelines on how to manage funds during a crisis. So when a Minister of Finance did that, we publicized these guidelines so that all accounting officers are aware about them and they know how they can be utilized. So at the end of the day, they don't say, we didn't know how to use this money. So we made sure that was done. But also we thought that it was again our mandate as CSOs provide alternatives, because all governments were panicking on what to do. Pump more money in health. But if you pump more money in health and people have nothing to eat, then therefore you won't be able to help. So we provided credible economic alternatives in managing the effects of the pandemic on the people, but also on the economy. To do this, of course, we had to generate a lot of knowledge products. We had issue briefs, for example, that would guide the policymakers on where they should spend the money and what should be done. We did economic policy trackers for Uganda, for the East Africa, and also for African region, for policymakers to understand what is taking place outside grand borders. The guidelines, we also ensured that we continue to provide citizens with information through the media, through Zoom meetings, on what the government was doing to address, to engage and finance to ensure that COVID does not affect us very negatively. But also ensure that the stimulus packages that the governments are talking about, especially Uganda, were also endured, because we know that during the pandemic, women were suffering more than men. And of course, we continue to ensure that we provided the media information that they can be able to publish, so that at least we know that we are doing the right things. So those are some of the things that we did, of course, through Zoom, through the emails, online platforms mostly, and also media. So what are the emerging lessons? First is that undertake joint tracking resources to fight corruption and misuse of resources, especially given the PFM guidelines, are not followed during the pandemic. During the pandemic, we realized that really some of these guidelines are not being followed, and also even if you have this joint mechanism of tracking, it cannot be done because everybody's locked down, and as such, it becomes very, very challenging. Increase community engagement, foster rapid response in a pandemic, especially through CSOs with eyes and ears on the ground, is very crucial. We also think that during the pandemic, one of the things that should be done is to ensure that civil society organizations should actually be more vigilant in their localities and in their work. There is also need for joint partnership to generate evidence based on factual research. That's another lesson I think was very crucial, that you need to work with parliaments, you need to work with ministries, you need to work with the civil society organization, local governments, to generate evidence. How many people do you have in your community that are supposed to receive relief food, for example? That one is very crucial. Civil society organization can provide a channel for structured engagement between citizens and also big government, because we have all the issues, opinions from the communities. It's easier for us to be able to give information. There is also a need to develop a comprehensive economic recovery stimulus strategy. I don't know what other countries have done, but in Uganda, our stimulus package is highly very questionable. We don't actively had a stimulus package because at the end of the day, it's the big boys and the girls who are able to take on it. So it's very, very important that even during the crisis, I think that is the time when everybody should be alert, ensure that in the process of panicking, we don't mess up a lot. I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Julius. And I like where you've ended that in the process of crisis, we should not panic. And I think it's the reason we are learning together here. How can we do it so that we do it in an organized and not in a panic, in an organized way, but not in a panic mode. You've emphasized the issue of reprioritization and reallocation. I think, like you said, civil society depended so much, and most of course of us developing countries depended so much on the developed world to intervene in most of our issues. But when this crisis hit and it hit globally, everyone was keeping whatever they have under their armpits, and it was a time of reality to test our friendship and reassess our capacities. And so we have realized that we can actually work sometimes without these troubles that we have been undertaking, courtesy of the loud interventions that have come from civil society towards government. We have realized that there are other areas that we have been putting a lot of money in when we could have put in others. So there has been better planning. And I thank you so much, especially also on the offices of community engagement, that when we don't learn to keep each other, and that is what Ubuntu is about, to know what is affecting our neighbors, then we cannot know how to help when those neighbors are actually in need. Thank you very much, our two speakers. Right away, let me go to our third speaker, Mr. Titus Ogalo, who is the program manager from of Transparency International, and he's very brief in how he wants to be described. He says he's knowledgeable in good governance with over 7 years of working experience, and has been a strong player in promoting aspects of accountability and monitoring aspects of COVID response in the Kenya context. So thank you very much, Titus, for making time for this. Please, let's hear from your side.
Thank you so much, Josephine, and everybody else for the invite to be part of this conversation. And I also want to appreciate my colleagues who have also shared great insights from different contexts. It helps. And Josephine, I thought maybe having a brief bio could be helpful in intriguing a bit of more interest, but we can always do more in as the conversation continues. Yeah, so I just want to share briefly about Transparency International Kenya's experience in collaborating with government, particularly during this period, and what we have noted, and also a bit of lessons, just like my colleagues have shared. But I would like to, first of all, point out that Transparency International Kenya, just like the name suggests, and perhaps as some of you might have known already, we are in the business of fighting corruption. So matters of good governance and matters of just looking into how service delivery can be done in a transparent and accountable manner, that is what we do. And we are part of the global movement that is all keen on ensuring that we fight corruption. But TI Kenya is an independent chapter within that global. Therefore, even as I share, my sharing will be very much leaning towards around our observations and experiences that were touching on transparency and accountability during COVID-19 response, and of course what we have noted so far as an organization. We are indeed a non-governmental organization working in Kenya. And having said that, I think I just wanted to start off by sharing the fact that in the Kenyan context, and indeed looking at the context within the region, the statistics seems to suggest that we have not been doing very good when it comes to the fight against corruption. If you look at the indices that are being done annually by the Transparency International Global, they seem to suggest that Kenya has not been doing very well. In fact, if you compare the East African regional colleagues, Kenya, we normally seem to be really in the front line when it comes to indices around the fight against corruption, which have not been depicted so well. And therefore, it is important to have that background to dive into the conversation, because we are coming from a perspective that, as it is, corruption has been a bit of a challenge. But now with the pandemic, we realized this was a bit more kind of exacerbated and a bit more pronounced. And the fact that also looking at the indices that you've been dealing with, the very sector that has been experiencing a bit of accountability issues is the very sector that was having a pandemic as it is. So that background is important to point out. And we normally like sharing so that we get to understand better context of corruption thriving in our context. That corruption indeed is just a situation when we have monopoly of power without accountability and discretion. And that is important just to point out as we start the conversation. Moving on, in terms of sharing with you this brief session, I will just highlight effects of the pandemic in the works of CSOs in Kenya, then collaboration between government and CSOs, and then emerging lessons that we have also noted from that. That will just be the format that we're using. I wanted to also start off by just pointing out these bits of quotes for your reflection, because this kind of speaks very much to what we've been seeing in our context. We like this quote by Warren that says that in looking for people to hire, you look for three qualities. That is integrity, intelligence, and energy. And if you don't have the first one, which is integrity, then the other two will kill you. I think I wanted to just kind of leave that here for our reflection, because as we were going through and as we've been going through this pandemic, this kind of really manifested in so many ways beyond the government officials, even in private practice. It sort of emerged as people are embracing working from home that you really need to work with people integrity, because that sort of kind of helps in really addressing many other aspects. In a situation where you cannot sometimes monitor everybody else, you can only count on the integrity. That has been a big debate and a big question in our Kenyan context, and we sort of feel that it is one critical aspect that really we need to address in terms of addressing the fight against corruption. Then the other one by Oprah Winfrey, probably you've heard about it, that real integrity is doing the right thing, knowing that nobody is going to know whether you did it or not. So I just thought I could highlight those just to kind of be in our minds as we reflect with you about the Kenyan context. So just a bit of some insights from a transparency and accountability perspective about Kenya's management of COVID-19. there are a bit of some concerns that have been registered. And of course, I started by sharing that looking at our corruption indices, we have not been doing very well, even though we have done quite a bit of some positive aspects that are appreciated. The current Kenyan administration, the current president, has made some quite bold steps and some bold initiatives. Unfortunately, some of those bold initiatives do not translate directly into lowering the tide of corruption when you look at it from a deeper sense. So we have always been oscillating between making a few steps forward and then several steps backward as far as corruption is concerned, and trying to address corruption in service delivery, and particularly in the government operations. And the COVID-19 situation was not even was not even different when it comes to the kind of corruption cases and scandals that we have interacted with. For instance, our own National Assembly in the departmental committee report acknowledged that utilization of COVID-19 funds were not done in accordance to our procurement guidelines and of course the rules. And of course, as my colleague has also mentioned, Julius, that in cases of emergency, matters of transparency and accountability, and particularly when it comes to public finance management, tends to be overruled and sometimes just circumvented just to do certain things. And that was the case in the Kenyan way. And of course, we saw it manifest itself in a very big way. And something that we are still also keen on and following up on is that the KEMSA, which is the agency that is mandated with distributing the drugs, was also embroiled in a number of accountability issues to a tune of 2.3 billion Kenya shillings, where there were questions around the PPEs that were bought have not been distributed. We are not so sure where they are, totaling to that kind of amount. And that is something that has been worrying. And we are yet to see significant steps around them and even significant action around them. And of course, this is happening at a time when the president had already given some very strong words and of course guidelines on how the procurement needed to be done, and even insisting that all these institutions which are in charge need to provide those data and information for public scrutiny, for public awareness. And we are still here, still trying to figure out how such kind of resources were used without much of detail or transparency and accountability. So that is just a bit of a detail and a highlight on how the COVID-19 situation has still also experienced a number of accountability challenges and transparency challenges. Well, whereas this is happening, we have seen effort from the government, particularly Parliament, in trying to do their bit in ensuring oversight, both in terms of putting the right policies in place, because before then, we didn't have even the right legislative framework on dealing with pandemic. So COVID-19 sort of provided an opportunity and a realization that that needed to be done. And also Parliament was also in the front line, try and interrogate some of these accountability issues that were emerging. And they were doing this in collaboration and sometimes through the push of the civil society. So civil society in Kenya, Transparency International Kenya included, played an important role in trying to, one, just be in the front line of asking questions around some of these accountabilities. And this was being done through press conferences, through asking for information, and also trying to provide some best practices that other jurisdictions were adopting just to ensure accountability during COVID-19 situation. When we were doing this, some of the areas that we experience a bit of challenges are, one, we realized that as civil society, during pandemic situation, we still have a long way to go, particularly with regards to access to information, because we really struggle to get a number of details, even though the Ministry of Health really tried, but you get to feel that the information that they were providing were on generalities. But when it came to serious accountability questions or aspects that required a bit of scrutiny, that information was not coming forth. But even all over, we noted that the Ministry of Health really tried to provide some general information on what needs to be done and all that. Also, we also realized that as civil society, that during this pandemic situation, it is important to look into aspects of technology, because through technology and use of ICT, some of the civil society tried to put up a COVID-19 tracking system, an online system where the public could log into and find out, because a number of institutions, both donors, well-wishers, and also corporate, were coming out to donate certain aspects of PPEs, food, or resources to the government to deal with various aspects of COVID-19. But nobody was telling us how those resources were being spent. And that information was not very much in the public domain. So the only way we could find a way of tracking those resources and donations was to come up with some sort of an online database where each and every pledge and each and every contribution was being noted and shared, so that we could encourage the public to go and find out. So far, the government has received what amount of pledges and what amount of support from other donors, and do we then know how these resources are being used? So that could only be done through technology, because people were in lockdown situation. And that kind of brought a realization that moving forward, working around accountability, definitely civil society must try and invest in ICT, because it's the only way to go. Not to mention the kind of challenges with the resources that civil society also experienced at that time. Quickly into collaboration between government and CSOs, one thing that we noted, despite the challenges around accountability and openness, there are some areas where we feel the government really tried, like I mentioned before. For example, in cases where we felt, particularly the CSOs felt, the government was not doing enough to provide information. There are cases when civil society could draft some guidelines and share with the government. Even though they may not take everything in terms of our recommendations, but at some point we felt that they were listening, because you could see some changes in how they were now responding and how they were making communication. So that level of collaboration in terms of sharing best practices is something that we noted in the Kenyan context, and it's something that COVID-19 has provided. Beyond that, we also, in cases where we felt there was need to provide specific information, particularly on financial usages and also on certain critical information, on accountability, we could invite the government officers to come and shed light, or even provide a more detailed information. And Kenya is one country that citizens are a bit active, and they tend to ask a lot of questions. And sometimes, if that is not provided for in a very good way, then it catalyzes a bit of some citizens' activity. So the government saw the need always to try and lean towards CSOs to be in the platforms where CSOs are and provide those information. That was a sense of collaboration that was noted, that was encouraging also to see. But also, there also collaboration in terms of sharing the messages, the guidelines that the government was issuing, just to see how the CSOs were using platforms to share this information to the wider public. And those were some of the very key highlights of collaboration between government and CSOs in terms of COVID-19. Quickly and finally, into the aspects of the lessons that we've learned throughout the process. Number one, I think one aspect that I would want to emphasize is that the use of ICT and technology in the fight against corruption is an aspect that can no longer be ignored, both in the civil society sector and of course also in other service delivery sectors, because that came out very prominently during the COVID-19 situation. Even us as an organization, we have already started piloting some of the aspects. We're already trying to see how can we integrate ICT substantively in the fight against corruption. Very important. The other lesson that is very key, and of course we try to see how best we can also learn from others. One of the fundamental aspects of good governance is access to information. We realize that this is still a big challenge. Of course, it is not unique to Kenya. We understand that this is something that most of us struggle with. Unfortunately, it is a key aspect that we need to find a way in which our government understand that providing information is not necessarily managing people in an appropriate way. Unfortunately, we still struggle with that. And I think moving forward is a lesson that we need to cherish and see how best can we improve on it. This is happening even when we have some of the very progressive and robust legislations on how to share information and provide information to the public. We struggle with this, we still struggle with this even currently as we get into the next phase of COVID-19, where management, we're talking about vaccination, still there is a feeling that some details and information is not shared as should be, as a best practice in terms of good governance. So that is it generally from my end. Thank you very much. And I give you that aspect of food for thought, which is something that manifested a lot from our experience, that the leaders must see that it is possible to make systemic improvements without committing political suicide, because in certain instances, we felt that some of our political leaders were avoiding discussions that seemed to be hot potato, because they felt if they delve into such conversation, not even provide information, those who are being treated as maybe committing political suicide because of the political framework. But we feel a brave leaders should always go past that. And that is a bit of our experience, and thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Titus. So we have all our speakers closed on these submissions, and I'm going to be opening up. And Titus emphasized doing the right thing. And of course, it's a call for everyone. It's not like we don't have enough resources, especially when you look at Africa. But are we doing the right thing with these resources? Many times they disappear in the hands of the few. And that's why we have these important agencies like Transparency International. And then he also talks about actions beyond words. What actions are we taking against the people we think are abusing their offices or authority? Corruption amidst scarcity is an issue of concern, and the aspect of access to information. I take note that we have 15 minutes to close this session. Access to information is something I found very critical, especially on these issues of pandemic. I see in South Africa, every portal you open, even university portals, they all have the very first page, you'll find information talking about COVID-19. So the ministry packaged one like basis or source of information or basic information for everybody, and everyone has taken his own as key players, like it is everyone's responsibility to ensure that this information reaches out there. And I found that very, very impressive. So I'll go to our chat. I appreciate again you, my dear speakers. And I will start with the first comment or question that is looking at issues of partnership. That was it easier to make new partnerships during the pandemic? Let me give this to Julius. Julius, maybe let me pick them all, then I'll leave you out. I'll have you answer them once. So Julius and Blanche, you mentioned about the aspects of getting new partnerships. And then there's also a concern that civil society tends to have reduced the steam. You also dropped when we all went complacent and thought that maybe the pandemic has gone down after all. It looks like you also dropped your guns a bit. So what happened and how can we step up these efforts, especially now that we are facing the second wave and live beyond this pandemic? So what more can we do with civil society? So those are your two areas of observation. And then what are the two ways or biggest things that we could do to improve collaboration? I think so it relates to question number 2. And then with our colleague Titus, there's a comment that at least the collaboration has been unified. There's proper communication now and improved resource mobilization, courtesy of the pandemic. You'll also make a comment because this has come from a colleague from Kenya side. Let's start with you, Julius. Let me start with Blanche, sorry. Blanche was first, and then I'll come to Julius and Titus.
Hi there, Josephine. I mean, I want to share a little bit around the partnerships. The importance of partnership was also around creative ways of also trying to get joint funding, because what does happen is we've got strong partnerships with government, but it's for contractual agreements on specific programmatic outcomes. So when COVID hit, nobody knew that was going to happen, which means now we had to then go and try and renegotiate. We cannot cannot do direct work because of COVID, we need to social distance. How are we then going to reallocate funds to telephonic calls, to maybe redesign and be innovative? Because I think CSOs have the opportunity to be more palleable and be able to shift and change. But I think the red tape around government funding is really that it can only be done in this particular way. And that does create limitations. So when we collaborated with each other, it was opportunity to do innovative, new, a different type of work that could be funded from different spaces. And I think that was helpful during the time.
Thank you, Blanche. And of course, I take note that especially when you're collaborating with government, we have what we call financial years. And so money has to be spent within a certain time. So even when there are interferences, sometimes it may not be flexible enough for it to move these budget lines to be used at another appropriate moment. So I take note of that. Julius?
Thanks so much for the comments. How would we find strong partnerships? I think like any other person, organization is also like human beings. When a crisis hits, you also begin to panic. You begin to say, okay, what are we going to do? Since you can no longer go to the field, you can no longer meet the people you have been meeting. The only thing is your telephone and your Zoom. What we found out that it was an opportunity for us to find the strength we had in our network. For example, we found that it was very easy to find that our networks in the villages were capable of actually conducting the work that we have been doing with them, even though without them. Because the capacity building we had provided previously, now we were able to put it in use without them. So it was an opportunity actually to find where we were weak as a secretariat here in Kampala, but also the strength we had in our outreaches in the districts of operation. So we tapped onto that. Secondly was we found ourselves consulting more with our peers, our other civil society organizations. I want to organize a workshop. How can I do it? Can you support me here? We need to reach to Bank of Uganda to organize an e-meeting. Who knows somebody, a senior person from Bank of Uganda? We need to organize a meeting with the MPs. Who can get them for us? So that enabled us to pick on the strength each and every civil society had, especially at the headquarters here in Kampala. It was not easy, but because we're sort of in a crisis mode, we were able to look outside the box, to rely more on others and also ourselves. And actually, when you ask this question, I'm asking myself, it was actually, I found myself during the crisis were a bit more busier. My team, even when we were not in office, were so busy in generating information and also working hard. So probably the crisis also triggers some mechanisms for you to wake up and become more vigilant. On why the steam is low now? Yes, the steam is, I agree with you 100%. The steam is low. It is low because we thought we were going to die, and we did not die. I mean, there are those definitely who died of COVID. The magnitude of the effect we threat view on us was not. And I think that's when the guards a bit went down. However, because now we are in the second wave, everybody is waking up to say, hey guys, I think we've let the guards down. It's not only civil society, it's even government, it's private sector, it's at an individual level. But I can tell you as of now in Uganda, if you haven't got COVID, your next of kin has got it. If your next of kin has not got it, your neighbor has it. So there is that kind of now the resumptive part. So, but the lesson I think here is we need to remain vigilant throughout. That mode that comes in, that kicks in for you to become vigilant and protect yourself and protect your neighbor should actually continue on. What would you say are the two biggest things government would do to improve collaboration with CSOs? I have worked for the last 4 or 5 years to invest more in relationship building with government. And I think for me, the two biggest things, one is to improve collaboration is One is on the part of civil society organizations. We need to understand the challenges that the government face in delivering services. Is that when you say government is bad, it could be wrong, because there are very good people in the government who are so much interested to ensure that they deliver these particular services, but they are hindered by certain challenges. It's for civil society organizations to understand the challenge. So government must come out candidly and let us know the challenges that they face. That's the number one. That will improve collaboration. It will even change the way you engage government. The second biggest thing that the government can do to improve collaboration is to provide information. For us as CSBAG, because of our investment in relationship building, it is easier to get information. Even in the parliament, when the committee finishes a report, there is how we are able to get the report. And that has enabled us to be a bit more objective. But if there can be a deliberate mechanism by government, provide information on the things that it does, it can greatly improve collaboration between CSOs and government. Thank you, Joseph.
Thank you very much, Julius. Let's hear from Titus, your responses to these issues that have been raised, and of course, the final word.
Thanks, Josephine. And I think Julius just took a point from my mind. Just want to reiterate. I think from my experience, information is very key. And I think here, it is important also to dissect that further. That information is useful when it is the kind of information that empowers the public and sort of sees that it answers the questions that are needed. Sometimes there are a bit of selection in terms of information to provide and be clear with the information that is required. We could have some general information, but sometimes people need a bit of more information. Particularly, I would want to emphasize that matters information that relates to now giving credibility, transparency, especially on resources utilization. That is not information that sometimes is very easy to get. But I think it's important to appreciate that that kind of information is important for enhancing collaboration between civil society and government. I just wanted to also reiterate that because it's something that I also had picked as an important aspect in improving collaboration between government and the CSOs. I also just want to point out that sometimes you get a feeling that when government is engaging CSOs, then there is a feeling that CSOs or non-governmental organizations are also different in the sense that there are those that call themselves development partners. These are the group that are seen to be providing maybe resources. They are seen to be helping in digging boreholes, providing chairs, building schools. And therefore, sometimes the government feel like these are the kind of CSOs that we need. Any other person else who claims to be a CSO and they are just in the business of asking questions about access to information, or they are just in the business of asking for transparency, accountability, these are not CSOs. And I think it's important to appreciate that those are of the CSOs that are also in the areas of promoting transparency and accountability. They're equally very important, and they need to also be embraced by the government in terms of collaboration, because sometimes you get a feeling that there is that bit of differential treatment, which I think is not helping with the bigger picture of forging a greater sense of collaboration with CSOs generally as they are. I think that is also something that I also wanted just to point out, apart from agreeing with my other colleagues who have also addressed that question. And then my colleague Alois says that there's a feeling that there was a great it's important to appreciate that COVID-19 provided opportunity for collaboration between CSOs and government, which led to unified communication resource mobilization. I would say yes, to some extent, indeed. And of course, to some extent, there were some gaps that, of course, are still being worked on, understandably. One thing I do acknowledge, and it's something that was acknowledged across Kenyan board, is that COVID-19, our Ministry of Health did quite well in terms of being robust with their communication, in terms of being robust with sharing details and all that. And they had a very organized and systemic way of providing information. The gap, however, was when it came now to aspects of sharing now, maybe not directly to the Ministry of Health, but now when it comes to aspects of now liaising with the other departments within government, just now to get details about accountability and resource utilization, which even led now, even the president himself, pronouncing himself to the need to various institutions to fast track some of the accountability issues. Now that is where there is a gap and we have a bit of a challenge when getting such kind of information, because we even know to date, there have been challenges of getting to know what happened to some of the cases that were investigated and the prosecution. That information is still not with the public, yet it's very important. But otherwise, I think there has been some good learnings, and the government was very receptive, generally, overall, in terms of how to engage with other actors, including CSOs in the Kenyan context. Thank you so much. I think those are the aspects I wanted also to highlight, and this has been a great sharing opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Titus. And I want to again thank Twende Mbele for organizing such an interactive session. In terms of the take homes that I've noted is to understand how Parliament, I'm saying Parliament because it's where I come from, but let me say government, how government works and how we can hold each other, both the CSO, we need to draw in from the operations of CSO and operations of government and learn to appreciate each other's kind of work and context. Aspect of information is very important. And of course, here we need to enhance ICT. We've seen how people have moved away now to Zoom meetings, we saw how even China was having deliveries in people's houses using technology to save the communities that were being affected by COVID. So we need to see how we can enhance use of ICT and access to information in a more friendly and usable manner. And of course, we need to still keep emphasizing the Ubuntu understanding and philosophy that you are because I am. So let's look out for each other and see that we can stand together as strong as possible to fight this COVID, which one day we'll look back and we tell our grandchildren that we overcame, that it came, it hit us, but it passed us and left us strong together and united more than ever before. Thank you so much. It's a great honor that I've been your moderator.